Going on, everybody? How's it going? Happy Thursday. It is November 11th, 2021. Happy Veterans Day to everybody that serves. Appreciate your military service. Hello. Hope your week's going well. Thanks for the follow, Jezebel in Hell. Appreciate the follow and the first time chat. So yeah, I mean, I do walk down to the basement, with the arms out, or at least one of them, because this one's still like working on the shoulder surgery, but a lot more flexibility. Chris Perillo in the chat. What's going on, Chris? Sorry, I don't know if you're hanging out for the chat or if you're like going to do your chat, but we always overlap. But good to have Chris Perillo hanging out. Y'all need to go follow Chris. Chris does some really cool maker stuff. He's got a huge community of folks that do loads and loads of 3D printing. Lots of maker, lots of Star Wars. Do what you can to get Chris to eat. He's got some pumpkin pie flavored jelly beans he absolutely loves. So go check out Chris's channel later on and do what you can to support Chris's love of pumpkin pie. Stick to the PT. Yeah, it does make all the difference for sure. Rotator cuff surgery back in July. So doing much better with it. But yeah, appreciate the thoughts on that. Chris, good to see you in chat, man. I'll drop by. We'll probably raid you in a little bit. I'll be on for hour and a half or so. And then we'll probably swing by your channel, but we'll see who else is live at that point. But yeah, I hope everybody's doing well. So yeah, I'm Ian Douglas. I'm the author of the website that you see up here, techinterview.guide. It's basically a website to help people get better at interviews for the tech industry. And so I typically do a lot of Q&A sessions, a lot of like just giving my perspectives, being an engineer in the industry for over 25 years, also being a hiring manager, director of engineering, like a lot of lead roles, a lot of industry hiring. And our hiring process is broke. Like it's broken in really bad ways, and I tend to get on a soapbox a little bit here about that. But yeah, I'm here to help everybody navigate those waters a little bit and kind of share my perspectives as a hiring manager. Like when we ask these questions, this is what we're hoping to hear. So I've got a whole email series that you can sign up for. You can check out the website, techinterview.guide. There's a daily email series on there that you can subscribe to. It's a 6-week email series. You get an email every day. And it's basically just presenting technical and behavioral questions, but from the interviewer's perspective of this is why this kind of question is important to us. So yeah, so you can feel free to check that out. By the end of November, early December, I'm hoping to break that into 4 different mailing lists. But you can go ahead and subscribe now, and then I'll figure out a way to kind of switch people over to the new system once the new mailing lists are up and running. Basic John, good to see you in chat. Yeah, it is the Chris Perillo for sure. Yeah, Chris is a great guy. I love hanging out on his stream and just interacting. He's got all kinds of really cool interactive stuff like floating around his screen that people can interact with. He's definitely spent a huge amount of time getting his stream up and running. Yeah, what else is going on this week? It's been kind of a busy week. Like, how is it Thursday already? It's ridiculous. So yeah, so tonight is basically just going to be Q&A. As always, you can drop questions in chat. I'm more than happy to make this stream interactive. So if you've got questions about tech industry, career hunting, or like job hunt, career coaching, all that kind of stuff, please by all means drop those questions in chat. I also enabled like a few cool little things. So if you click on the little bubble underneath the chat, for those of you that have been on the stream a while and you've kind of accrued some points, you can now redeem those points for things like make sure I stay hydrated, or ask me to tell you a dad joke or something, just to lighten it up a little bit. So it's not always just me on my soapbox talking about the tech industry and our broken interview process. But yeah, I'm here to help people out. So by all means, drop questions in chat. I've got a bunch. So people submit questions to me over LinkedIn, over Twitter, and you can reach out to me on Twitter. This is my LinkedIn, but I'm also on Twitter with the same handle, Ian Douglas 736. You can follow me on Twitter, and then you can submit questions to me, and I always ask them anonymously, so you never have to worry about like, oh, Chris asked me this question. Chris is, no, I'll never say your name. And so feel free to just submit questions and I'll give you my perspectives. So there are a lot of white dudes on the internet giving their perspectives, giving their ideas on things. I don't want to be just another white dude out there, spouting opinions. So this Sunday, I'm actually going to have a whole panel of folks on here. So definitely come check this out Sunday night. We're going to have a whole bunch of folks who went through a whole bunch of software development training and then went and got a job that was not full-time software development. they got into roles like DevOps or developer relations or sales engineering, things like that. And so we're going to have a whole bunch of those folks and just find out like, hey, what was it like going for an interview for a QA role? And, how did you then pivot that into a software development job later on? Those kinds of things. So did they use those jobs as a way to get into the tech industry, or was that really the passion of what they wanted to do? So we're gonna have a really good discussion. We're gonna have 4 more people on the stream for that. I love having folks on the stream just to hear that perspective and so on. So it's gonna be pretty fun having those folks on there. But yeah, for tonight we're just gonna kind of kick back with some Q&A. I've got a lot of questions to kind of go through. Every time I do one of these Q&A sessions, I get a bunch more people going, "Wow, that was a really good question. Here's like 5 more." And so I've got this never-ending list, which is fantastic. And some of them do get duplicated, and that's totally okay. It's always okay to, don't ever worry, Ian's probably already answered this question. Ask it anyway. I sometimes change my mind too. As I learn things, as I gain perspective, as I learn from other people, sometimes my own perspective will shift and change. In fact, if you go back and listen to some of the streams that I did, when I started out back in July, some of my opinions have already changed on some of that. So as I gain more awareness and hear about other people's circumstances and experiences, I sometimes change, my way of thinking. Or as I learn a new topic and I kind of dive in a little bit, I've been reading up on HR practices and how applicant tracking systems actually work and things like that. I sometimes change my own perspective, and I think that it's important to change your perspective as you learn and grow, and explain that, hey, my opinion has now changed because I've learned such and such. And so go ahead and ask the question again. I'm more than happy to answer the same questions. I'm never gonna take a question oh, here we go with this question again. No, that's not me. I don't act like that. I tend to be pretty mature about the folks that I try to help out, because that's effectively what I'm here for. I've been in the industry for over 25 years, and I'm just here to help build up community and raise up people around me to help get you into this tech industry, because it's actually a pretty cool industry, and you belong here. So whoever you are, whatever your background is, whatever you look like, whatever you sound like, wherever you're from, you belong. You belong in tech. And so I'm here to help you out any way that I can. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. In fact, if you find me on LinkedIn, send me a connection request. Don't just follow me on LinkedIn. I post a lot of stuff. I post the podcast every single morning, Monday through Friday. And I do share a lot of other things, and I comment on other things. But go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn. Actually send me a connection request and say, hey, I found you through your live stream. The reason that I prefer the connections over just the follows is then you can use my network of people so that later on you can say, hey, Ian, can you introduce me to somebody like Chris? I've got Chris works at Intel, for example, and maybe you really want to go work at Intel. Well, I can now make an introduction to you to Chris and say, hey, this person came on my stream. They're curious about your company. Have you got a minute to have a virtual coffee and chat with them about what's going on? A lot of my network are also full of people who are happy to help build up community and happy to help people out too. So I will make introductions for folks, but you got to connect with me on LinkedIn in order to do that. All right, so let's dive in. So I got a handful of questions. Some of them are going to be longer to answer than others. And this week I've actually got a variety of questions, not just from a candidate's perspective, but also asking me from a hiring manager's perspective as well. And so I'm going to be going through a handful of those questions kind of as we go. And Alan Sharded Jeans, welcome. Good to see you in chat. Cool. All right, well, let's dive in a little bit. So some of these questions are going to be as a hiring manager, what do you think about this? And some of them are just asking for general advice. And I love all questions. So ask away. Ask in chat. I will absolutely bring those questions in kind of as we go. We'll probably wrap up hour and a half, somewhere in there. We'll see how long we want to go. Check out the bang help command if you want to check out how to find my YouTube channel. Find me on LinkedIn, Twitter. If you need a referral code for interviewing.io, because I do mock interviews over there, you can find a referral code for that. And also the little chat bubble underneath. You can redeem your chat points for different things. I was just trying some goofy stuff today. All right, cool. Let's dive in. As a hiring manager, have you ever regretted hiring someone? Kind of after the fact, yes. Most of the time, I was pretty careful vetting people and hiring people. This one particular company, though, I was actually in the process of interviewing and trying to bring people on the team as I was like putting in my notice to like leave the company and go work for someone else. And so I thought I had done my due diligence on a person, and the team kind of went through and they interviewed. And unfortunately, the way that this particular company was kind of set up at the time, we had several directors who we had as part of the interview process, and it was kind of our typical thing of, because it was a fairly small company, some of the directors would, like from the other departments like marketing and customer account management and so on, would come and interview the person as well, just to kind of hear like, hey, we've all got to work together on this. So even though you're in engineering and we know we're going to have to go through Ian to like sort of allocate your time to help us work on things, they still want to be able to like interact with you. And so sometimes they would be part of the interview process. And unfortunately, the makeup of this company at the time, it was still fairly small. We only had one director who was not male, and they interviewed this person. And we kind of went around the room afterwards and said, what do we think? Do we think this person's got the skill? Should we make an offer? And everyone's like, yeah, I think we could make an offer. And the one non-male on the team's like, something felt a little weird. And this is a problem in tech, is when you have a room that's mostly full of people who are all the same, sometimes we end up with blind spots. And unfortunately, in this scenario, we went ahead and we made an offer to the person. And then we found out later on that, this person just did not interact well with non-males. It started giving a lot of people the creeps, and ended up letting him go. So I extended the offer as I was like leaving the company. And I found out like not too long after that, they made an offer. This person started, that they turned around, they let him go just because he was creeping people out. And it's unfortunate that that happened. And I feel like to this day, I feel really bad that that happened, that we didn't really dive in a little bit more and listen to that one director's experience to really dive in on like, what felt off, like, because they couldn't, they were kind of articulating a little bit at the time, but not like a huge amount. Like what felt off, like just something felt off about their character, and, that they weren't really paying, or they weren't like showing respect to the director who was not male. And it was unfortunate that we didn't dive in on that and dig in on that a little bit more. And so this is a good example of how even myself in the industry, like I'm here to help people, and over the last several years, I've done a lot more training around diversity and inclusion and equity and equality and things like that, to where now I'm far more aware of those kinds of things and far more sensitive to those kinds of things, where, even 6, 7, 8 years ago, I might not have been. And it's possible for us to kind of learn and grow, but in this scenario, it didn't work out. It ended up being a really bad scenario. And so that was like the one time I regretted like making an offer to somebody and bringing them on the team without really vetting, like from the people that interviewed, like what was your actual experience, and if you don't feel comfortable about hiring this person, why not? Let's dive in. And it's just unfortunate that it happened. Got a question from chat. I've been focusing on cover letters lately. What are your thoughts on reusing 75% of it? I think you can. I think you can absolutely reuse a big chunk of your cover letter. There are going to be some parts of the cover letter that you want to customize based on the company. And I did a YouTube video a little while back, and so you can check out the YouTube archive on sort of the format that I talk folks through. So just search the YouTube channel for cover letter, and you'll find the video on there. I typically follow a 3-paragraph sort of format, where the first paragraph is talking about you and about the role and why you're really interested in that role. And the second paragraph is going to be highlighting the skills and the background that you bring to the company. Like, how are you going to make that company better? How are you going to make the team better? How are you going to make their job easier? And then the third paragraph is just kind of the closing statement of like, you're awesome. I think I'm awesome. We're heading in the same direction. You need to call me. And just make like a really strong call to action as you wrap up that letter. So that middle paragraph could mostly get reused if you're applying to the same kinds of companies where you're highlighting the same sorts of skills and the same sorts of projects and so on. But if you're applying for two roles that are quite different, then you want to make sure that second paragraph, like even if you copy and paste most of it, that you're still going to like reword things and rearrange things in a way that it sounds like you have still customized it for that company. Because if you just write a very generic, like, hi, I'm Ian, and these are the things I'm interested in, and these are the skills I have, and I think you should call me, people that actually end up reading that cover letter, they're going to think, okay, well, you know, kind of hits on what we're looking for, but it still sounds a little bit generic, like it's all about you. Where the cover letter needs to sell them on themselves. Like, you're going to be a better company by hiring me, and this is why. And so, yes, the cover letter is about you. It kind of starts about you, and then, like, by that third paragraph, it's really shifting the focus back onto them of, like, you know, I'm Ian, these are my skills, this is how I'm going to make the company better, and, you know, I think your company's awesome, and I want to work for your company. And so you're kind of, like, shifting the perspective from them looking at you to them looking at themselves and how they're going to be better with you on the team. So, yes, you can reuse a good chunk of that cover letter, but you still want to make sure that it's customized enough that it sounds like you wrote it specifically for them. And typically what I advise in that second paragraph is pull language and phrases out of their own job post and put that in that second paragraph. So if they're looking for a team player with, you know, lots of good collaboration skill, then you're going to actually use that phrase in that second paragraph. I'm a team player with really strong collaboration skills. Like, you want to sound like the job post. So yes, I think a lot of the structure can absolutely stay the same, but you still will want to customize that kind of as you go. Follow-up question from the Basic John. Any advice on how long one should be? I'm presuming cover letter. I'm finding it hard to keep things brief. Yeah, I can see how that can happen. Again, that's why I typically stick to that three paragraph sort of format, because it forces you to be brief. You want to save some of it for the interview. You don't want to give away all your secrets. You don't want to give away all the magic. And the cover letter is really just a way to say, hey, you know, this is my way of enticing you to go pay attention to my resume and give me a call. And then during the interview, that's where you're really going to pull them in with, like, the deeper depth of all the cool stuff that you've done. And so the cover letter is really just an introduction to you and why they should call you. It does need to be concise. You don't want it to be many, many paragraphs. You certainly don't want it to be 2 pages long. They're not going to read the whole thing, I guarantee. If you can keep it to 1 page, 3 paragraphs, where each paragraph is like 3 or 4 sentences, they're probably going to read most of the cover letter. So that would be kind of the format that I would follow. Again, you can look at my YouTube channel and find the video on cover letters that I made there. Cool. Thanks for asking, Basic John. I appreciate the question in chat. And another question in chat. How do you handle hiring someone for a position when there seems to be a shortage of good candidates and no one really wows you, but you have work that needs to be done, so you can't just keep interviewing forever? This is the epitome of the dilemma in the tech industry right now. Companies want people with experience. They want people with very specific skill sets, and those people don't exist, or they do exist, but they want a ton of money, or they do exist, but they're not even looking for work. So how do you find those people? And I actually just had this big debate 2 nights ago. What day is it? It's Thursday. 2 nights ago, RubyConf was in town here in Denver, and I went downtown Denver and met some folks that were doing a get-together with the Boulder Ruby meetup group. And a bunch of us were chatting specifically about this. Like, why not just hire people that have good team skills, good collaboration skills that seem like they're going to be fun to work with, and then just train them on the things they don't know? If you think about the return on investment with that, if I spend, say, 3 or 4 months trying to find this mythical unicorn with all of the skills that I'm looking for in that job post, let's say on average I'm spending $5,000 to $10,000 a month trying to source with recruiters, and all the time spent interviewing people and screening people, and, you know, all the, like, the actual engineering time and the management time of the process of going through all that. It's expensive to hire people. Or I could just hire, like interview people until we find someone who's like, hey, you sound like you're going to be a lot of fun to be on the team. You're missing a couple of technical skills, but guess what? Your first week of onboarding, we're actually going to send you to like a training camp for like a week to get you up to speed on that thing. We might pay $3,000 to $5,000 for that training, but guess what? Now we've spent a couple of weeks hiring for that role, plus the, say, $5,000 to train you. We're still money ahead than if we waited 4 months to go hire somebody, and now we've got somebody now, not 4 months into the future. Like, why don't companies realize that? That blows my mind, that companies don't understand the return on investment that can make, and how me hiring you and sort of pouring that training into you and say, hey, we want you on the team and we're going to invest in your growth on day one by sending you to this training and making you better about these things, and we're going to shape you into what we want you to be on the team. For the company, then, like, think about the loyalty you would have as an employee to that company of like, whoa, you're like investing that in me. Like, ridiculous, right? It's going to blow people's minds. Josh, appreciate the follow. Welcome to the stream. And Josh says in chat, they do realize that, but those people won't equal a senior. That's true, but it depends on the background and the skill that they bring. And unfortunately, a lot of companies are like, we have work to do. We have to hire a senior level dev. I would argue no, not always. In some cases, yes, but it does depend on the work. And so I don't want to like argue too much about the semantics of it, because yes, there are some projects where they absolutely need to have certain experience around scalability or security, or some deeper optimization that is critical to the function of the business. I'm not arguing that at all. But I think in a lot of cases, you could still hire an entry-level dev or an intermediate dev, send them to that training, and when they come back, have them pair with somebody, and you could still get a good return on that investment instead of waiting 4 months plus, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, spending a lot more money interviewing all these candidates. So you're like, nah, you meet like 90% of the criteria, but you're not like this magic unicorn that we want, so we're just not going to make the offer. I wish companies would take a chance on people and just say, you know what, we're going to hire you anyway, and we're going to pay to train you in the things that you don't know. And, we'll find mentorship for you, and we'll find a way to make that happen. I think that it's a smarter business move in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, we don't see that very much in tech. I wish that we would see that more. I think it would probably keep people from job hopping, because they're going to feel a loyalty to the company. Like I'm not saying the company should write in a contract like, if you leave, you owe us money for that training or anything like that, because I think that can be a very disingenuous way of burning a bridge with an employee on their way out. But I think it's an important move to invest in your employees, no matter what that training is, whether it's just internal training, like, people, sharing knowledge through like lunch and learns, or little like, mini technical, webinars or conferences, just to share knowledge about what they know, or to pair program once in a while so that you're sharing that knowledge with each other. I think it's an important thing to do anyway, but I wish companies were more intentional about it. I think it would buy a lot more goodwill in the industry. Just my perspective. Again, I'm just here to share my perspectives and my thoughts. I'm always happy to hear other people's thoughts and see other things in chat about it as well. Josh followed up in chat. That being said, after 3 months of looking, we did exactly what you said. We hired a non-senior. I'm curious, Josh, how that turned out for you. Did you hire the non-senior? Did you give them a little bit of training? And what's that person like now on the team? Like, do they seem like really super excited to be on the team? Are you getting really good productivity out of them? How do they feel about your company? I'd be curious about that. And thank you for the reminder to hydrate. Alan jokes in chat, they're terrible, and he regrets it. It could be. Josh says he's doing great. He's absorbing everything. Yeah, awesome. Funny how that happens, right? So yeah, I think it would be a good move for companies to realize, like, you don't have to have a senior level dev, and that senior level dev doesn't have to know all the things. I think you can sort of pinpoint what they know and what they don't know in the interview. You can send them on some focused, dedicated training for the things that they don't know that you need them to know, and then just let it play out from there. I think it buys a lot of loyalty and a lot of goodwill from the company to the employee, for sure. All right, let's move on to the next question here. So some of these answers are going to get a little longer than others. And this next one is kind of an interesting one that I found. I got rejected from 3 FANG companies. Now I'm forced to work for a medium-sized business. How do I cope with this failure? This is how they worded the question. I'm forced to work for a mid-sized business. How do I cope with this as a failure? So to rephrase your question, you interviewed at 3 really large tech companies known to have the most difficult interview process and selection process in our entire industry. And then you did get a job offer from a mid-sized company where you're still going to learn things, you're going to grow as a developer, and you're going to get a paycheck and benefits, and you want advice on getting over this as a failure. Don't get me wrong. I think it can be devastating when you apply for a development role with a company that you really admire and you're super passionate about, and you don't advance because of a failed technical challenge. I'm not trying to downplay that at all, and so I don't mean to come across crass or that I'm downplaying it, but to word it as a failure, I think is something that I would encourage this person to kind of examine. Yes, working at a FANG company is a really great goal, but I also tell folks all the time that your first job in tech doesn't have to be your dream job. Sorry, I just got an alert. Oh, you got a cheer. Hey, thanks for the cheer. Appreciate it. Your first job doesn't have to be your dream job. It just has to be a place where you can get professional experience and give you the means by way of paycheck to continue to practice other things and learn other things in order to plan moving on to something bigger and better. So go find any job you can in tech. Get a year, 2 or 3 of experience, and then go back to that FANG company. They're way more likely to hire you because now you've actually got professional experience. And if you continue that study as you go, you're going to be that much better as a candidate, and you'll probably end up making a better salary with a year, 2 or 3 of experience than you would have as a new grad. So something to keep in mind there. But yeah, I would say like try to be a little bit like try to downplay it as a failure a little bit, because I don't think of that kind of thing as a failure. I look at the whole scenario and go, you wanted a job in the tech industry, you got a job in the tech industry. Yeah, high five. Like I would love to high five you because you got a job. You did the thing that is bugging so many other people out there right now. They're trying to get a job in tech and they can't. And you've done that. So for starters, congratulations, you got a job. And so, yeah, I get where you're coming from, and I empathize from the position of, you know, you really want a job, you apply for a particular company, and you don't pass their technical screen, and so you don't progress. That does feel devastating. Like I said, I'm not trying to downplay that, but I think that if you kind of look at it as, you know what, I didn't get that job yet. I'm not there yet. I'm going to get there. But in the meantime, I'm at least getting a paycheck. I'm still going to learn things. I'm still going to grow. And while I'm putting in my, 35 to 40 hours, whatever per week, I'm going to continue to learn and grow and do leak code and like continue to study and continue to learn things and study system design so that when I do go back to those FANG companies and reapply, I'm going to really do well in those interviews. So I think it's just a mindset shift. I think like more of a growth mindset than a closed mindset, where I think you can look at it in a positive way as opposed to looking at it in a negative way. Because if you focus on the negative, like, oh, I'm a failure, I didn't get that job at a FANG company, I think that you can end up dwelling on that, and it just ends up being a bit of a downward spiral. Where if you focus on the positive, like, I got a job in tech, and now I'm being paid to learn things, and I've still got time that I can continue to study. But meanwhile, I've got a job, and I've got benefits and so on, and maybe other perks and so on. So I would just examine the mindset on that. All right, next one on the list. I failed several coding interviews in a row, even though I feel like I practiced a lot. I graduated with a computer science degree, but my algorithm and data structure skills are weak. Should I rethink if I'm suitable to be a developer? I will start my answer by saying you are suitable. It just means that the businesses where you've applied weren't a good fit for what you are good at. Some companies do these leak code challenges infuriatingly, where the leak code challenge they have you do has absolutely nothing to do with what their business is all about. And that can be frustrating in and of itself. So unfortunately, a lot of sort of weight is put on these technical challenges in our industry purely because we don't have like a standards committee or a licensing sort of mechanism that shows, oh, you have done specific sort of training, therefore you are qualified to be an API developer, and you've done this training, therefore you're qualified to be a mobile developer. We have like certifications that you can get, but everybody's certifications are a little bit different. The curriculum that you study is going to be a little bit different. The degree that you get from one university is going to cover probably 60 to 70% of the same material that somebody else's degree is going to cover, but there's always going to be differences. And because we don't have sort of that standards in our industry, this is why our industry is like one of these weird things where in order to get the job, you have to prove that you can do the job. And I often use kind of an analogy, like you would never hear about a brain surgeon go apply for a job at a hospital and have that hospital say, well, go do some surgery on this person, and if they live, you get the job. But that feels like exactly the kind of hoops that we're asked to jump through as software developers or other developers and technical roles in the tech industry. We have to show them we can do the job so that they can trust we'll do the job and go ahead and make us that offer and hire us. And so, you know, a lot of companies lean on some sort of way of demonstrating or sort of proof that you can do the job. Some people are like, well, they should just look at my GitHub history and see that I can write code, or, you know, my reputation alone should do blah, blah, blah. Like, I've been in the industry for 25 years and I've got hundreds of repos on GitHub, me, myself. You know, people should just hire me because I'm awesome. Well, that's also kind of arrogant. And sometimes companies won't hire you because of the arrogance side of things. But there is sort of this proof factor. Like, they need to see you actually write code. They need to hear you think through a problem to realize, like, okay, yeah, you can actually do the job. I think that the interview practice that we go through and a lot of companies go through, I think could be greatly simplified. But that's getting a little bit off topic. So as far as this person's question, like, should I rethink if I'm suitable to be a developer? I would say, you know, if you're going through these interviews and you're failing, I would say, like, you know, when you are practicing, like, what kind of feedback are you getting? Did you get any feedback from the companies about what went well, what didn't go well? Are you practicing with other people and getting their feedback? Do you have a mentor that you can check in with? Could you reach out to somebody to start mentoring to help you get better? Another analogy that I use a lot on the stream is, like, I could go to the gym. I just happen to have like a little 3-pound weight here that I use for some of my strength training for my physical therapy. I could go to the gym and I could just lift weights and I could just, you know, move things around. Am I going to build muscle? Yeah. Am I going to hurt myself? Probably. But I'm still going to build muscle, but it might not be the kind of muscle that I think I really want. And in the end, like, just doing it by myself and going through the motions by myself is not going to be as effective as if I had a trainer, if I had a coach there showing me how to move and why a particular movement is going to build a particular kind of muscle, and how, you know, this muscle is connected to that muscle. And, you know, you can't just always work biceps because you want the cool biceps. You've also got to work the back of the arm and the shoulders and things to support that bicep muscle. And it's very similar in software. You can just focus on just core vanilla JavaScript, but unless you're doing stuff in a framework, either like Express on the back end or something like React or Angular or Vue or something on the front end, like, how are you applying that knowledge? And so unless you're getting feedback from a mentor on, yes, you were able to solve a challenge, but did you do it well? Or here are some ways that you can improve. I don't know that you're going to see as much improvement. Yes, you could still go continue to learn and grow. Like, I could read all kinds of books on working out at the gym to try to build up muscle and so on, but it's not going to be the same, and it's not going to be as quick as if I had a coach to work with. And so I would say find a mentor that you can work with and have them help you and have them give you honest feedback and have them help you with code reviews and teach you why we do things a particular way and how to make your code better, or how to, you know, maybe tweak your problem solving approach, or how to think through things, you know, maybe from a different perspective to show you how particular algorithms work. something like that. Having a look through chat, yeah, surgeons have to do their boards every couple of years too. That's true. They do have to prove to some degree that they do the job, and I agree. But it's not typically part of the interview process, where we as developers, we have these kinds of hoops that we have to jump through every time we want a job, and so it does feel like we're we're the dancing monkey and we're just being told to perform when we're going to these interviews. Jezebel jokes in chat, they have to do their boards, but it's easier to operate on a piece of wood than a real person. That's true. Alan kind of follows up in chat with something that I was saying. So Rust is like the cool bicep that looks good, but isn't as useful as you think. No, I think Rust has its place. I haven't actually programmed very much in Rust. Some programming languages are better as kind of like an all-purpose language. Like I think of Python as an all-purpose language, and Ruby to some extent can be kind of an all-purpose language. You can do like shell scripting and back-end scripting and like big framework apps and so on. Or you can find something that's just very niche and has like a very sort of specific use case where it's not as sort of generalized. I think a lot more modern languages are trying to be kind of the general purpose kind of tool. But I think knowing the best tool for the job, I think, is important too. So I'm not trying to downplay like any particular technology. I'm just saying, like in the realm of practicing things, if you're practicing and you're not getting feedback, then are you actually going to get better at that skill? You can kind of fumble your way through and find answers and find solutions and so on, but unless you're getting feedback and studying why that feedback is going to make you better, you're not going to get better as quickly as if you had a mentor there to help you out. That's kind of the point I was making, is like get some mentorship, get some help, and get some feedback from people. And if you're going to these interviews and you're not passing the interview, get feedback from the company. Some companies are hesitant to give you that feedback, but if you say, hey, I know I didn't do well in that technical challenge, I was wondering, is there someone on the team that could talk me through what I wrote as the code and just give me some ideas on how I can improve that code? I think some companies will be okay with that. It really depends company to company, and whether someone at the company has that kind of time. If you've been doing the network and outreach that I kind of suggest, and you can go look at other questions that I've answered and other streams that I've done, through my YouTube channel or through the website techinterview.guide, you can go find sort of how I talk about networking and outreach. And before you even apply at a company, if you can reach out to somebody there and ask them about mentorship and get to know them a little bit before you even apply for that job, maybe that's the person then that you could kind of reach out to later on and go, yeah, you know what, I bombed that interview. It didn't work out very well. This is the question that they asked. This is how I solved it. Do you have any feedback that you could help me out with? Or could you do a code review on that and sort of point out what I could have done better? That's the fastest way that you're going to get better, is to get that feedback from people. Stephen Hungry says in chat, do you think I should try and get references for my Google onsite? If you know people that work at Google, they can give you a reference, and sometimes that can speed things up a little bit. If that's the question that you're asking, if you're just asking like, should I try and find like resource material on what to study for Google? Google actually publishes a really good guide on, go read up on this kind of material, go study these kinds of things, so that when you come to the onsite, you're as well prepared as possible. And so a lot of the big FANG companies are very transparent about what their interview process is, and they're more than happy to share that with you. And I think more and more companies are also happy to share, if you're interviewing with them, what kinds of things you can go study or what kinds of things you can prepare ahead of time. Like maybe you've got to do some sort of technical presentation, or maybe you've got to do like a take-home assignment where they want you to focus on test-driven development or something like that. And they'll give you that information if you ask. Within reason. They may not, like, it may be kind of vague, and they may say, well, go study some data structures. And hopefully they're being a lot more, transparent about it than that, where they can say, like, yeah, we're going to be quizzing you specifically on low-level architecture. We're going to quiz you specifically about system design for scale, things along those lines. Now you have a better idea of what to go study and what to go prepare. Stephen follows up in chat. I got sent some form where I had the option to add references of actual people. Okay, so yeah, if you know people at Google, then yeah, that's where you would give them their names. And I think it's just a validation of, like, somebody that works there, and they may go say like, hey, do you know this Stephen Hungry person? should we give them a call, that kind of thing. So it may be like an internal reference check before you even get into the interview process, just to kind of find out like what do they think, or what do they know about your education level, so they can ask an appropriate type of question when you get there. Like if you haven't studied computer science, they may not ask like the really deep computer science-y types of questions, but again, it also depends on the role a little bit. So yeah, if you know people that work at Google, then that would be the place to put that information. If you don't know people at Google, I mean, you could go getting introduced to people at Google and say like, hey, would you mind if I list you as a reference on here? I know we've only just met and we've only interacted a tiny bit, but I've got this form to fill out. Would you mind if I put your name on there? But if you know people at Google, go ahead and ask them and just say like, hey, would you mind if I put you on this reference thing? And if they say yes, then put their name on there. I would always suggest don't put someone's name on a reference of any kind ever, whether it's Google or otherwise. Don't give somebody's name and contact information out as a reference without telling that person first. The last thing you want is for them to get a phone call by surprise and say, yeah, this is Google, I'm calling about so-and-so. And you're like, who? Because then that doesn't look good for you as a candidate if the person they're calling for a reference has no idea what's going on. So always be sure to talk to your potential references first and get their permission to give out their contact info. Carmen in chat, how's it going, Carmen? Says, I'm an introvert, so I found networking virtually a lot more comfortable than in real life. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a lot easier to have a virtual coffee with someone where you're just, over Zoom, there's not a lot of pressure there. And it's just like, keep it 15, 20 minutes and ask some very specific questions and say, hey, I really appreciate your time. I want to be respectful of your time, so I'll let you get back to what you're doing. But, I appreciate you hanging out for a little bit. Definitely show them that gratitude, when you're having that conversation as well, because that's going to make them feel better about spending that time with you and make them want to spend more time with you. So definitely gush on them a little bit and tell them how much you appreciate the time that they spend. But yeah, I agree with Carmen. It is, for me, although I consider myself kind of ambivert, so introvert extrovert is kind of a spectrum of its own, and ambivert is kind of right in the middle. And shout out to Lita for teaching me the ambivert is actually like part of that spectrum. And it basically means like I can go heads down and I appreciate my one-on-one or my alone time, where I'm just like by myself and I'm getting my work done, but I also really enjoy being around people too. And so there can be people who are not just, I have to be around people or I have to be alone. There are those of us that want to be in between, like we want a little bit of both, and we're called ambiverts. As an ambivert, I like meeting people, I like chatting with people, I like going to group events. But sometimes if I'm around like a really large group of people for a long time, it's like, okay, I need my alone time now. I need to like go decompress a little bit. And that's okay too. But yeah, networking virtually, I find is a lot easier. Because people, especially those that work from home, they tend to have a lot more flexibility of like, yeah, I got work to do, but if you want to do like a 15-minute call, like, yeah, let's meet after lunch or something. Just hop on a quick call and have a quick chat. Most people are going to be very open to that, where if they're at the office, it makes it a little more difficult for them to have phone calls with folks. So if you can catch people that work from home, I think you'll find a lot more flexibility for that kind of thing. And I think a lot of people like the distraction too of like, yeah, let me think about something other than work for a minute. I think that can be a good way to sort of do that networking as well. Jezebel says, I love group events, but they don't recharge me. Yeah, and everybody's a little bit different as far as like where they land kind of on that spectrum of like, do you enjoy it? Do you get recharged from it? Or, do you appreciate going so that you can learn from other people and you get to like, fist bump or elbow bump or something so you're not like spreading germs. But that you still get to be around other folks who are like-minded and, are like you and, share common interests and things like that. So especially in the tech industry, I think that, just building up community, I think overall is really important. All right, next one on the list. What is your number one interviewing tip? I couldn't pick just one. I think, that's the whole reason I run this whole channel. This whole channel is my interview tips. I would say some important things to keep in mind when you're interviewing, especially when you're kind of a new grad. A lot of my target audience tends to be like new grads, code school grads, people that are new in the tech industry that are trying to get that first job in tech. I would say the first thing I would say is you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be genuine. And then it's either a fit or it's not. When you go to that interview, you know what you know. You don't know what you don't know. And that's okay. My job as the interviewer is to find out the sort of the depth of your knowledge and the breadth of your knowledge. Like, what do you know and how well do you know those things? And then it's also my job as the interviewer to kind of take that back to the team and go, does that fit what we're looking for? And if it doesn't fit, then it doesn't fit. If it does fit, great, you get an offer out of it. But you don't have to know all the things. You don't have to go practice all the things. You don't have to go learn all the things. You don't have to feel like you're 100% ready to be ready. Now, it doesn't mean, you can go interview with only like 10% readiness. I think that there are sort of core understandings that you need to have depending on the area of discipline that you want to get into. And I've addressed that on other questions on other streams and so on. But I think especially for an entry-level developer, I think what holds a lot of people up is the feeling that I have to know more before I can even go interview. And I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I think that you can still go interview because that interview process is going to teach you about yourself. And it's going to show you the things that you know. And as they ask questions that you can't answer, it's going to show you what you don't know. Write all that stuff down. And then go study those things. If you feel like you should have known those things, go write those things down and then go study them. There's nothing wrong with that as a practice. So that would be my number one thing. You don't have to know all the things. You just have to be genuine. From there, I would say the next big tip I would have is have a good process to follow and practice your answers, both to behavioral and technical questions. Like, practice it out loud, record your voice, listen to your answer. If I read a question like, how does HTTP 1.1 work? I can kind of play it in my head and go, okay, request response, and these things are in the headers, back and forth. But unless I actually speak the words as if I was telling somebody and recording that and playing it back, I don't get a good sense of how long was my answer. Do I ramble? Do I say a lot? I know I say a ton on this channel. How well am I presenting what I claim to know? Unless you actually practice saying the words out loud and recording it and look at how long it took you to explain that answer, you're not going to have as much self-awareness. And you can't walk into these interviews and just wing it. You have to practice these things. And so you have to anticipate the kinds of questions that you're going to be asked and then practice those questions. So again, if you have a mentor, and I talked about having a mentor in a previous question, ask your mentor to critique your answers as well, or have them throw questions at you. You will see some advice out there like, oh, practice these questions with your family and friends. But if your family and friends aren't technical, then they're not going to be able to help critique the quality of your answer. Like, was that a good, technically accurate answer? Or was it just, yeah, you said some words and I don't understand any of them because I don't know tech. Then that's not going to be as helpful as far as the feedback goes. Now, they will be able to say like, oh, you mumbled a little bit, or you said, like a bunch of times, or you said a bunch of times. Like, they can point out those kinds of things. But as far as technical accuracy, you need to have a good mentor that can sort of give you that critique on your answers. So I think it's important, again, just to have good mentorship and good people around you, good community around you to help practice those things. So those would be my two big tips. So the first one, you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be perfect. And the second one is you have to have a good process to follow and practice that process. And I'll talk a little bit more about process in another question, as it relates to things like technical challenges and so on. But those would be my two big tips. Carmen says in chat, you can't know all the things if things are constantly changing. That's true. But do you know how to learn? That's spot on. Absolutely. I think it's important that that you understand how to go learn things, especially in our industry where things constantly change. Languages change, frameworks change, methodologies change, and it's important to stay on top of those things. Otherwise, your skills get stale. Carmen redeemed some chat points for a dad joke, so we're going to take a little break here. Let's see. Lately I've only been getting sick on weekdays. I must have a weekend immune system. A weekend immune system. All right. Cool. Hope everybody's doing good. I tried learning once. It was awful. Yeah. I hear you on that. And knowing what to go study is really hard too. Like, what do you even go study? Like, how do you do that? Like, someone Someone asked me recently too on LinkedIn, and I didn't add it to the questions for tonight, but they said, like, I work full time, and I'm trying to get a job in tech. I feel like I should go learn JavaScript and TypeScript and React. Like, how do I even do all that? Plus study, just core data structures and algorithms, and do my networking and my outreach. Like, how do I juggle all that stuff? I'm like, the best way you can. It's tough to do, and you have to find sort of a cadence and a pace that's going to work well for you. But it's definitely tricking to do for sure. Carmen asks, where do dads store their jokes? I feel like I've seen this one, but I don't remember the answer, but I hope you'll tell me. And being a comic book nerd that I am, I really don't understand why Marvel doesn't use the Hulk to advertise things more. I mean, he's effectively a really big banner. All right. In the database. That's great. Well, you know when a joke becomes a dad joke, right? When it becomes apparent. All right, let's get back to some questions here. How do you answer the question about your expected desired salary? I've covered this one off and on in the stream in the past. I think the key thing here is knowing your value in the industry, both based on your skill as well as your desired career path, and it can also vary based on your location. And so finding local salaries will be important, but also national averages to know, like, is my area of where I live drastically lower as far as like pay scale than other areas? And would it be worth, like, could you relocate to like a bigger city? Maybe you're going to pay $500 a month more for rent, but if it's going to give you like an extra $20K a year on your salary, is that an okay investment? Those are the kinds of things that you need to kind of look at as you're playing that out. But understanding what you know and what people at your peer level are making in the industry is the first step. You have to know your value. In the past, for example, and this is kind of going back to something that I said early in the stream, like I often shift my own thoughts and perspectives on these things, is I used to tell people, when you get asked about your salary, just tell them like, oh, I'm new in the industry, so, I don't really have a good sort of reference point. I would like to get through the interview process and have you evaluate my skill and let me know what you think my skills are worth. And at the time, I'm like, that sounds like a good way of sort of deferring the question. But over the years, I kind of thought about it and go, well, it kind of makes you look like a little bit naive about your own value. It shows a lack of awareness of how much do people in your position actually make. Where if you say, like, I've got a target in mind, but I'd really like you to tell me, like, what is your company offering or something like that. And there are different ways of sort of deferring that conversation. I've covered that in other streams too. But the key thing here is you have to find salaries for your skill set in your area and for the type of career that you want to have. The number one way to do that is to get all of us talking about our salary. I think it's an important step both for equality and the equity of everybody in tech. Get rid of those pay gaps to know, that you're being underpaid versus a coworker. I think it's an important thing to be able to talk about. And a lot of companies are like, oh, you shouldn't talk about what you're paid. Well, it's because they're trying to take advantage of the fact that you don't want to talk about how much you get paid. Feels sometimes like money is like one of those taboo topics that we should never talk about. So I think if you can ask the company the range of salary that they're willing to pay, for example, like if I interviewed with a company and they said, like, how much, like, what's your expectation? If I were to turn that around and say, I'd be curious what you're offering for the role. And then, a lot of companies would be like, oh yeah, sure. This is, kind of the range that we're thinking of. And if I said, okay, well, I think I could work with that. Let's continue to chat. Again, I'm not committing to that particular range, but I'm letting them know that it's not a deal breaker yet. And it also leaves it open that I could still negotiate. But if they say, like, oh, we're offering like 120K, and I'm like, cool, that sounds good. Now I'm kind of locked into that money amount a little bit. It's going to make it a little bit harder to negotiate later. If they really press you on a range, then I would always defer back to them and say, I would like to know what your company is offering for this role. Like if I were to do this now, for example, just because I'm very passionate about people being paid the same, no matter who you are, what your background is, what your education level is. I believe everybody needs to get paid the same amount for doing the same kind of work. And so if a company were to ask me today, what's your salary expectation? I would say, I would like to know what the company is paying or is offering for the role, and a commitment from the company that everybody else doing that job is also being paid within that same band. So that they know that it's something that's important to me, especially as a white male in tech. I want to make sure that if I make a certain salary, that I'm not like drastically above other people just because I happen to be white and male and privileged in that regard. I want to make sure that everybody on my team is being paid the same as me for doing the same work as me. And if not, why not? Because it's a sucky thing to do to people. And then you can kind of take the conversation from there. But again, if they give you like a money amount, and I just realized my camera froze, so let me go fix my camera. If you give them a money amount, or if they give you a money amount and you say, yes, that money amount sounds good, let's continue to talk, you are kind of locking yourself in a tiny bit on that, where I think it's important to sort of frame the conversation as, let's continue to talk, like that's in the realm that I was thinking, but let's continue to chat, and we can discuss this later on. They really are just checking, like, are you asking for like way, like significantly more money that we can't afford to pay? That's really what they're checking there. It's not always like, oh, we want to lowball you and we want to pay you as little as possible, although that is their job, to pay you as little as possible. But I think if you're open and having good, honest, transparent conversation about it, I think a lot of companies are going to be more forthcoming with what they're willing to offer for the role, especially in today's market. So absolutely ask them what they're offering for the role. But having an awareness, so kind of going back to the theme of the question, having an awareness of what your skills are even worth based on your experience, based on the kind of career that you want to have, and based on location can make a big, big difference. Now, some companies will pay different amounts based on where you're physically located, and that's really up to the company. Like if you live in a major metropolitan area where everything is more expensive, they may offer a little bit more money. Is that unfair to someone else that lives maybe in a more rural area where they've still got good internet and whatever, but the cost of living is a lot less? Well, not really, because at the end of the day, they're probably both taking home the same amount of money, and that's really what the company is trying to figure out there. But I think it's definitely a conversation to have with the company about that. All right, next one on the list. What are some technologies and frameworks that you recommend getting familiar with? I would say it depends a little bit on where you want to take your career. In fact, on Sunday, so kind of want to plug this, the stream that we're doing on Sunday, November 14th, is going to be a whole panel of people who studied software development, but that got into different kinds of tech roles like QA and sales engineering and so on that are not necessarily full-time software development. And we're going to learn about the kinds of tools and so on that they learned, but then the kinds of tech stacks that they ended up working in. Because the kind of role that you want to get into is also going to dictate a little bit what kind of technologies that you need to learn. At a minimum, I'd say you probably need to be really good at one or two like high-level programming languages. You don't have to be an expert at them, but I would say know one of them extremely well. I would also recommend, if possible, trying to learn a little bit about a compiled language, whether it's like Go or Java or C++ or you just C. I think understanding how compiled languages work, partly from being strongly typed languages, I think can help you think about your programs in a slightly different way. But again, you don't have to be an expert at them, but you should be an expert in one language and, pretty proficient in a framework of some kind. But then from there, I mean, where do you go from there? It's going to depend a lot on the kinds of work that you want to do. So knowing some basics about like how the web works, like HTTP, different versions of HTTP, like 1.1, version 2, maybe start to learn what HTTP 3 is all about, like Web 3.0. I would say knowing Git is a must nowadays. You should really know Git, whether you use GitHub is kind of beside the fact. But knowing command line Git commands, I think, is kind of a must-have skill. Understanding some simple deployment kind of work, like whether you're deploying to like Heroku or Netlify or something like that, knowing how to actually get a project live on the internet somewhere, I think is a really nice thing to have. And bonus points if you can get like a CI, like a continuous integration, like Travis CI or Circle CI or something like that to automate that deployment as well. I think, again, it's going to give you a deeper appreciation for how those things actually happen. I'm also personally a really big fan of TDD. So learning test-driven development and how testing is used within software, I think can make you a really strong asset on a team. But again, those are just my perspectives. So, you know, and a lot of what I just outlined is for like a web developer. Like, what should a web developer know? But if you're going to get into DevOps or sales engineering or a QA role, then those technical stacks and technical choices are going to be very different. If you're getting into QA, you're probably going to learn a lot more like automation and scripting and a lot more kinds of testing tools. If you're in the DevOps realm, you're probably going to learn more like system administration and stuff like that. But it also depends on what kind of DevOps you're doing. So yeah, I hate to use the "it depends" sort of language on things, but it really does depend on what you want to learn in your career. Now, Carmen asked in chat, what is a high-level language? A high-level language is like Python, Ruby, JavaScript, C#, where you can the language kind of looks like pseudocode, whereas it's not like the really deep technical. Like if you've ever seen like Java code, there's lots of parentheses and curly braces and lots of very intricate looking like symbols that get put into the actual code. Where high-level languages, like in Python, for example, you can say if not variable, and then go do a bunch of code, where in other languages you can have like parentheses around that, and instead of the word not, N-O-T, you're actually putting an exclamation point. So like having an idea about like how some of those high-level languages work, I think is a good starting point. High-level languages, you tend to write a lot less code than the low-level languages because it's kind of abstracting away the low-level functionality of what the software is doing with higher-level language. Like I can tell my kids, go clean your room, and they know what that means. That would be like a high-level instruction, where under the hood it means go pick up all your clothes off the floor, go put your books back on the bookshelf, go clean up all the food wrappers and stuff that you've got sitting on the floor under your desk. Like go clean all those things. And so it's taking a lot more of the nitty-gritty smaller instructions and abstracting it into higher level things. That's typically what we talk about when we talk about high-level programming languages. All right, Jezebel redeemed some chat points to remind me to hydrate. Appreciate that. I thought that would be a fun sort of interactive thing to do in chat. So, all right. Yeah. Oh, I found out the other day that I'm colorblind. Yeah, that news really came out of the purple. All right, so this one, this question is going to kind of relate to a question that I answered earlier. Do I have to write perfect code in a technical interview challenge? And this is kind of going back to the idea that I was speaking on in a previous question, where I kind of hit very briefly, like you need to have a good process. And so do you have to write perfect code in a technical interview challenge? I would say no, especially if you're new in the industry. But also especially if you're doing it like on a whiteboard, where you're literally like writing on a whiteboard or some kind of collaborative editor. Like for example, when I interviewed at Google back in the day, they literally pulled up Google Doc, like a Google Doc, and they're like, write your code in this Google Doc. And so you couldn't check for syntax, you couldn't actually execute it, you couldn't actually run it. As an interviewer, we're going to forgive a lot of syntax errors in those kinds of scenarios. It doesn't have to be syntactically perfect. It doesn't have to actually execute. Like I'm not going to like copy and paste that into an editor and go, nope, you got an error on line 3, this or that. Like we don't care. We're just trying to see, like, do you get the understanding and the high level sort of approach that you want to take? And so we're less hung up on the actual syntax of things. But when you're writing code for a technical challenge, where you're actually in some kind of editor where you can run the code, we still don't expect it to be perfect, but we do expect that if you do run it and you see some syntax errors, that you know how to fix it. What's especially important for me is that you understand that you need to read the entire error message. so that you understand what went wrong and where. And a lot of programming languages will tell you, like, it happened on this line, and here's like a pretty descriptive error about what happened. Sometimes if you just kind of glance at the error message, you think you know what you needed to do, and you go and you change something completely different. And so one of the things I look for when there are problems in the code is, what is your debug process? Sometimes debugging things is just as important as writing the code itself. But we still don't expect your code to be perfect. It really comes down to the process of how are you solving the problem. Especially early in your career, I think the process that you work through is probably more important than the code that you write. How are you explaining the problem back to me? So this would be the process I would follow. So you get a technical challenge, explain it back to me in your own words. Ask me lots of questions about things that you don't understand or that may be a little bit vague. If you don't understand the example that is given, see if you can give yourself a simpler example and ask the interviewer, like, so you want me to do this manipulation on this array. If I make an array that looks like this, I would expect this as the output. Is my understanding correct there? They'll correct you. They'll tell you, like, yes or no. They want to see you succeed. So they will help you through that process. And then from there, like, talking through the design of what it is you're going to go build before you actually start writing the code. In my history interviewing people, I see so many people where you give them the technical challenge and they immediately just start writing code. The implication there is that as you're writing the code, you're still designing it as you go. And because you haven't necessarily thought all the way through it, you may make some bad design decisions that then mean you have to go back and refactor that code later on. And refactoring that code is going to take time. It's going to make your debugging a little bit trickier. And so having that process up front where you're restating the problem, you're asking questions, and you're kind of working out the design a little bit, whether you're writing out some notes of, like, these are the steps that my algorithm needs to take, or better yet, writing some pseudocode so you can kind of shape what that's going to look like, I think would be a really important step to take. I've got a YouTube video that you can check out on the channel where I kind of walk through, like, reverse engineering problems on LeetCode, and I talk about writing out pseudocode. So you can go check that out if you want to see an example of how to do that. But I think that those are kinds of like a good process to follow in those technical challenges. So the code doesn't have to be perfect, but I hope that you're going to have a good process for trying to figure out that problem in the first place. So restate the problem, ask lots of clarifying questions, see if you can give yourself an easier example, and then write out your design a little bit before you get started on the real thing. And then from there, again, especially for entry-level devs, that's going to be more important to me than whether you get the code, like, really accurate and perfect. Now, there are companies out there that still expect your code to be accurate and perfect in the most, like, elegant, like, chef kiss, like, beautiful kind of clever code. And those are going to be, like, the much harder companies to get into because they expect that you have gone through the effort of studying all these algorithms and that you're able to identify the problem really quickly and so on. And they will expect that you're writing perfect code. But those are, like, the top of the best kind of candidates that they're trying to find. So if you're applying at those kinds of companies, then yes, you will need to work towards that. But I would say there are going to be a lot of companies out there where they're going to be more concerned about your process. So have a good process to follow, and sometimes that'll help kind of uncover, like, what the code should be doing as well. All right, next question on the list. What makes somebody stand out in an interview? This is going to kind of go back a little bit to a question that I answered earlier on the stream of, have I ever regretted hiring somebody? In this particular case, I regretted not hiring somebody. So what makes somebody stand out in an interview? I would say passion and energy, especially for an entry-level developer. So this question was asked by an entry-level dev. And so I want to focus on the answer as though you're new in tech and you're trying to get that tech job. How do you stand out in that interview? I think having passion for what the company does, that you care about my company, you care about what we do, you care about who we serve, you care what we're about, and that you're going to fit in on that culture really well. I would say that's going to stand out probably above and beyond most things. I actually missed out on an opportunity to hire a very passionate junior dev. And I still wish that I had taken a chance on her. She applied for this job, and she had gone to a very short boot camp. I asked her to show me her portfolio of projects, and she showed me a capstone project. And I'm like, okay, you've got one project. Where's the rest of your portfolio? And she's like, I only have the one project. But that project aligned really, really well with what our company did. But at the time, I had some constraints on my team, and I was really looking for someone that at least knew test-driven development. And so as I'm like sitting down, I had a coffee with her, and she was like talking me through what she learned at the boot camp. And I said, well, what did you learn about TDD? And she said, we had a half-hour class on it where they told us it would be something we would learn on the job. And I'm like, oh, it's going to be tough to bring you on the team, because and it wasn't the lack of knowledge. It was the lack of support that I had waiting back at the office. As a manager, I need to make sure that when I hire someone on my team, that I'm setting them up for success. And at the time, I didn't have a team that was going to have the time to support her that much. And I wasn't confident in my team having the time and the ability to like teach her and coach her on these things. And I ended up interviewing a couple of other junior devs who did have TDD experience. And I tried to make an offer to one of them, and then it ended up not working out because we ended up losing a senior dev on the team, which meant we had even less support. And so I just had to pull the junior role completely, which was super disappointing. I really appreciate like bringing someone new into the industry and like help shape them and mold them into what we want them to be as an engineer, as a developer. And I lost out on the opportunity. And so in this particular case, I regretted not hiring this particular person. I've kind of like lurked on their LinkedIn from time to time just to see what they're doing. They've been in the industry and they're doing great. They've been in the industry now for several years, and they're doing great things. But they had so much passion, and their whole capstone was like exactly what our company did. And it would have been a really tremendous fit. I just didn't have good support waiting back at the company if I had, brought her on the team. And I don't want to do that to anybody. I'm not going to hire you and then like, make you go swim in the deep end of the pool when you're brand new. It's not fair to you. So it's unfortunate when that happens. But I think bringing a lot of passion and energy and having that good process, I think will outweigh a lot of technical skill or lack of technical skill. Just having a look through chat. Commenting is key. Having a comment explains what the code is doing is very much appreciated. Yeah, for sure. Every company has their own standards of writing code and communication. That's true. Yep. Appreciate the perspective on that, Carmen. Because Jezebel had asked in chat, do any companies appreciate code that pushes readability and developer empathy over clever code? Yeah, absolutely. This is something that we've actually dealt with at the company where I work right now. Somebody found some code that was really hard to read, and so they went in and they made it more readable. But it turns out it was really hard to read because it was very highly optimized. And by making it more readable, it became less optimized, and it actually became a bottleneck for other things. And so then the team had to go like, why is our system suddenly like 3 times slower on this particular area? And it's because someone went in and changed the code to make it more readable so that it was easier to maintain. And it's a trade-off that we make as developers. There's actually something funny that I saw just this week it's actually been going around the internet for a while, and it's this commented block of code saying like, if you've gotten here, please be aware that nobody in the company knows what this block of code does. And if you spend time and try to fix it, you're going to break things later on. So just increment this number down here of like number of hours wasted, trying to figure out this block of code. And it was up to something like 200 hours or something, like engineer hours, trying to figure out what this block of code did and why changing it was going to break things. That's the unfortunate part of what we do. If you need really highly optimized code, then that's the kind of business critical code that I think absolutely needs unit testing and even like feature level testing or integration testing to make sure that when you throw different inputs at it, you're getting the right outputs, because it's such a critical piece, so that if somebody does go in and change it, that it broke because of that thing. So those would be important things to keep in mind there for sure. All right, well, we've been going for an hour and 15 minutes. Let's take a pause here. I'm going to hydrate a little more, and curious if there are other questions in chat that we can kind of address kind of as we go. How's everybody else doing? How's your week been? Anybody got any job stuff going on? Any upcoming interviews? Anything exciting going on? that you're willing to talk about. If not, that's okay too. Always curious how things are going for folks. Jezebel's got to head out. Appreciate everything. Thanks for hanging out tonight, Jezebel. We'll see you next time. Definitely check out the stream on Sunday. It's going to be a pretty interesting panel and kind of hearing about like tech adjacent roles and stuff like that. So if you can come by on Sunday, definitely come by. All right, cool. Well, I think we'll do like 1 or 2 more questions and we'll probably wrap up for the night. Actually maybe 3. I can answer one that was actually really fast. This one will be kind of a quick one to answer. Have you ever been offered a job after a single round of interviews? Yeah, several times. In fact, my last several jobs, where I'm at now at Stream, was a conversation that turned into a job offer. Before that, I was teaching at Turing, and that was a conversation that turned into a job offer. And before that, I was working at Stream, which was a conversation plus a round of interviews, which turned into a job offer. And before that, I was at Simple Energy, which was literally a conversation and a job offer. So yeah, my last 4 roles were pretty much conversation turned into job offer. Some of that comes from reputation, and some of it comes from just position and having good references and so on. Like when I got the job at Simple Energy, they were looking for a manager at the role. I had just gone through management training, and I said, well, do you want me to come by and do the technical interview? And they're like, nah, I looked over your resume. You worked at SendGrid for 4 years. If you were incompetent, they would have fired you. So, you know, I'm going to trust their process. And so I didn't have to go through like the whole technical side of things. But then again, it was a management role, so there wasn't really anything to be technical there. When I went on to Stream the first time, that one was a little bit technical because I was trying to position. They were looking for like a Ruby developer and a PHP developer and a Python developer to maintain a bunch of SDKs, software development kits. And I said, well, I know all those languages. Like, roll all that into one job, and I'll do that as like a full-time job, and kind of do that as developer relations work. And I ended up wearing a lot of hats at that job. I think I counted when I left, I was doing like 15 different roles between like security audits and internal like office IT work, and also like the guy going to Costco and like, you know, stocking the snacks and stuff like that. So I was doing like just tons of things. When I got the job at Turing, I had already been mentoring for the school, and literally the guy that runs the school reached out and he's like, you want a job? I'm like, yep. And that was it. And then going back to Stream, they were looking for an instructor to kind of help with onboarding. And I'm like, that's the experience I have. I already know the company. You already know me because I worked for you for a year and a half. And they're like, all right, let's do it. And so at some point it does turn into like a reputation, sort of history kind of thing, but also making sure you're not burning the bridge when you leave a job. Because I left Stream on such good terms, it left the door open to come back. And that makes a big difference too when you're job hopping. There's actually something on LinkedIn that I think I just reshared yesterday about boomerang employees, like employees that actually come back to a job. And you know, some things to consider when doing that sort of thing. And it was an interesting read. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, go check out that article because it's an interesting thing to think about. But I think it's important that you do leave a company on such good terms that it leaves that door open to maybe go back. You never know what could happen. But if you like rage quit and, you know, burn the place down on the way out, it's going to be much harder to kind of go back if you need a job later on and it turns out that you've got the kinds of skill that they're looking for. They may not want to hire you back. All right, last 2 questions here, and then I think we'll wrap up for the night, and then we'll go find somebody to raid. What is the average turnover for junior developers? What kind of career roadmap are we looking at for the first few years? Is it in our interest to climb and gain experience by a lateral movement or to stay in the same position? Like, does the industry value expertise versus experience and so on? This one's got a lot to unpack. So what's the average turnover for a junior dev? Again, it depends on the loyalty that you feel for the company and why you're thinking of leaving. A lot of people get into tech and then, you know, we kind of hear like, oh, you need to change your job every year and a half, 2 years, so that you're constantly learning, you're constantly growing, but also to get the title bump and to get the, you know, the 15% salary, you know, whatever, as you as you change, because a lot of companies aren't going to give you that much of a raise. And so if you really want to kind of fast track your salary, then you're going to change your job really frequently for that first couple of years. I think for an entry-level dev, though, I think the turnover can be a little bit higher because you may not really have a good idea what you want to do in tech. And so the first couple of jobs I would say that you have in the tech industry are probably going to be you figuring out what you want to be when you grow up. Like, I think I want to be a web developer. Well, go do that job for a little while and then ask yourself again, do I still want to be a web developer? Because maybe you want to change and maybe you want to do DevOps, and then maybe that changes and you want to do mobile development or something like that. So I would say the first couple of jobs are probably just you figuring out what you like and what you don't like. And that could also turn into like companies that you like and companies that you don't like. And so most people looking at an entry-level dev resume, and by entry level I also mean like the first like 2 years of experience as well, because you're still pretty new in the industry. It's okay if you job hop a little bit, but they are looking for a little bit of loyalty. And so if you take like a bunch of like 6-month jobs or less, you're going to start to find that people are going to be reluctant to hire you, because they're going to think, well, if we hire you, you're only going to stick around for 4 months or 6 months. So do I want to take that chance, spend money and invest in you and kind of build you up as an employee, and then you turn around and leave? Most companies want a little bit of return on that investment. So they're hoping that you're going to stick around for like a year and a half, maybe 2 years. But in our industry as well, I think there's kind of a perspective from the hiring side as well, that if you stay for 3 years, you need to show like a progression in your skill and your responsibility. Otherwise, you're just kind of repeating. You're doing the same thing on loop year after year after year. And so you don't have 5 years experience, you have 1 year of experience 5 times, and you're not really growing and learning. And so when you go get that next job, it's not the same kind of 5 years experience that you would have had if you were in a role where you're constantly challenged and growing. So the question is saying like, what kind of career roadmap are we looking at? I mean, that depends entirely on what kind of job you want to do. If you want to be in web development or mobile development or game development or whatever, you want to work on blockchain, you want to work on database stuff, you want to work on centralization or decentralization, you want to work on scalability. Like, there's so much stuff that you could go learn. Nick T online, good to see you, man. So it will depend a lot on what you want to do. So the second part of the question, second half of the question, is it in our interest to climb and gain experience by lateral movement or to stay in the same position? Again, that depends on whether you're happy at the company. If the company can make opportunity for you to learn and grow and continue to challenge you, then stick around, especially if they've got like equity and things like that will vest. It can be very lucrative to stick around a little bit longer. Not always, but sometimes it can be. So definitely something you want to consider there. But if you're not happy with the company, or you think you've kind of gotten out of the company what you wanted to get for that particular kind of role, then it's totally okay to pack up and leave. Again, it is somewhat expected in our industry, but if you do it too much, then it'll start to look bad. And so I generally tell people, like when I'm looking at the resume, if I see like your last couple of jobs were fairly brief, then I would say, okay, whatever that next job is, you need to stay there for a couple of years. Because you need to start showing people that you're willing to stick around for a while. And then once you stick around at a job for a while, then if you do like another 1 year job or year and a half job, it's not really going to be frowned upon, because they're going to see a history of like, okay, well, you hopped a little bit and then you stayed for a long time, then you hopped around for a little bit and you stayed for a while. But if you're just constantly changing your job every 8 months to 12 months, I mean, one of the first questions they might ask is like, what's going to keep you here? Like tell us why you like our company and why you're going to stick around at our company. That's going to be something that they're going to want to hear. So something to think about there for sure. All right, last one I think for the night, and then we'll wrap up. I failed a coding interview challenge, but I solved it in under 30 minutes once the call was over. This has happened to me several times. What can I do? There is a lot of pressure in technical interviews, and there's a lot of pressure to write code while somebody is watching. in the Twitch chat, for example, where you redeem the little chat points for things like dad jokes and things like that. I considered like making one where it's like, you know, go redeem like a couple of thousand chat points and I'll do a leak code challenge live. And I'm like, oh, but that means I got to code live in front of people. There's a lot of pressure to do that in front of others. And sometimes being able to solve the question after the fact is because now the problem is already going to feel a little bit familiar. You've already thought about it a little bit. You've already had an opportunity to look into that a little bit. So sometimes it'll feel a little bit easier to get into it from there. Nick just redeemed some chat points for a dad joke. Let's see. That's a good dad joke. You know where pirates get their hooks? From the secondhand store. All right, last dad joke. What's the best time of day to go see the dentist? Tooth hurty. All right, let's get back to the question here. So the question was, you know, I solved it in under 30 minutes once the call was over. So by already kind of looking it over, like in the interview, it may be new and novel and you've never seen it before, but after the fact, it's like, okay, well, I've already seen the question. I've already thought through it a little bit. And so sometimes that does make it a little bit easier. And that's also a good argument for lots of study. And I've got whole interviews on the YouTube channel that you can look at around like how to sort of shortcut that leak code grind and just studying those strategies. I would say during the interview though, when you start to feel like you're having that struggle, some follow-up questions would be, did you ask the interviewer for direction? What was the process? Like in a previous question, I kind of talked about the process of restating the problem, asking questions, writing out design steps and things like that. Like, did you go through all of that? Did you have any kind of conversation with the interviewer as part of that process? And if not, if you're just like jumping into code and struggling, you know, my job as the interviewer is to try to help coach you through it to some degree, but I have to be fair to other candidates, so I can't coach you too much. But like asking clarifying questions about the inputs and things like that and writing out, you know, kind of what that process is as you go. After the fact though, if you solve it after the fact, I have seen people where they've given feedback to the company like, hey, I appreciate that you took some time to interview me. I know I didn't do well on that. I actually took it home and I continued to work on it. This is what I came up with. Sometimes that'll be okay because like I said, there is pressure. It looks like my camera froze again. There is pressure on like during the interview to like perform on sort of on demand, right? We have to write code while somebody's watching, and that's not always a great feeling. There is, you know, in the real world, if like when we're taking on a task to go build at work, we're typically given some time to like go think about it, go process it, go work on something. And if you have something, like come back to me. But during a technical interview, we want to hear that thought process. And that's why we're sitting there watching you to make you do the code. But again, that raises the anxiety and the pressure of doing all this stuff. But I think, you know, if you get to the point where you're writing out all those steps and you're writing out some pseudocode or something, one thing that I didn't mention on the previous answer about what that process is asking the interviewer about their opinion on your approach. I would say it's important to be careful asking them, does this look okay, or am I on the right track? Because that kind of wording and phrasing can make it sound like you're not confident in your own answer. But if you just ask the interviewer, like literally word it like this, what do you think about this approach? Then you're not showing that you're unconfident in your approach. You're saying, this is the approach I want to take. What do you think? Now you're just asking them for an opinion. And as an interviewer, I will be honest with you. If I see a problem in it, or if I think that something's not complete, or maybe you didn't consider a particular edge case, I may ask some leading questions to get you thinking about that a little bit more. But again, as an entry-level developer, I'm more interested in that process than whether you actually wrote really great code. But again, that's just a bias that I carry as an interviewer. Not every company is going to feel that way. Not every interviewer is going to feel that way. But for me, when I'm interviewing an entry-level dev, I care more about the process than actually writing good code. Going back to the theme of the question, you're able to solve it after the fact. and this keeps happening, then I would say it sounds like maybe more practice is needed of studying the strategies and being able to identify the kind of problem that it is, and then having those strategies studied well enough that, you know, if you see a problem, you're like, okay, this sounds like a heap problem. These are the steps I need to take. Or this sounds like a depth first search. These are the steps I need to take. Or, you know, or maybe it sounds like a depth first search. These are the steps. But now that I work through those steps, I realize, nope, that's not going to be the right answer. So now I'm going to go back and kind of re-examine it again, maybe ask some more clarifying questions again to better identify what we call the pattern of the problem. But I think as you practice different kinds of problems and you study these patterns and understand the strategy of how to solve that particular pattern of problem, you're going to get better at this. And so it really just comes down to practice. And the good news is practice will make you better. The downside is that practice takes time. And if you're in a hurry to get a job, then it doesn't feel like you have the time. And so there's a bit of a paradox there of like, I need a job, I don't have the time to study, but I need the time to study in order to get the job. So there's definitely some balance that you need to find there. And it kind of goes back to something else I said earlier on the stream of, you know, I was chatting with someone on LinkedIn where they said, I'm already working full time and I feel like I need to learn JavaScript and React and TypeScript in order to go apply for a job, but then I've also got to study data structures and algorithms, and I've got to do all my network and outreach, and I got to customize resumes. Like, how do you find time for all of that? And my question back to them was, why do you think you have to know JavaScript and React and TypeScript? Like, if that's where you want to take your career, then yes, you should go learn those things. But if it's just like, I think I should know that so that I'm a better candidate, well, do you have to know that to be a better candidate for that particular role? Like, do they want that as a skill? Is it a nice to have skill? If so, I think you could interview without it. But again, it depends on where you're at and when and how you feel ready. But also goes back to a question that I answered previously. You don't have to be 100% ready to go apply for that job and do that interview. As an interviewer, I don't expect you to have all the answers. I don't expect you to have perfect code. I just expect that you have a good process to follow and that you're going to show me what that process is, especially as an entry-level dev. As you progress in experience, then yes, I want to actually see you write good code. I want that process to be like really locked in, really quick, and be able to identify the pattern of the problem and get into the code as quickly as possible so that we can see some progress. But as an entry-level dev, I don't have that expectation. But again, that's my own bias as an interviewer. Every interviewer is going to have different biases, and that's just one of my biases. So take that as you will. Cool. I think we'll wrap up there for the night. We've been going for an hour and a half. It was good to see everybody in chat. Thanks for hanging out, and thanks for kind of taking questions and helping each other out. It's always great. This hour and a half goes by so quick. Like, I could just go on and on and on, but I got to wrap up at some point, right? But yeah, I appreciate everybody asking questions and so on. I think it's really, really great. But I will hang out if anybody's got like any last questions, any comments, anything you want to chat about, tech interview related, job related, anything like that. Happy to hang out for a little bit more and chat. Nikki T coming in with the Bob Ross on there. So funny that you mentioned Bob Ross. Bob Ross is also one of the things that I talk to people about when I talk about like system design and planning out the design of what it is you want to go build, especially with system design, is I tell them, do your system design like Bob Ross paints a painting. And by that, I don't mean like beat the devil out of it and smack a paintbrush against an easel. But when you think about how Bob Ross paints a painting, he always starts with like a very plain sky and eventually like maybe builds the mountains and then eventually builds the foreground and eventually gets into the happy little trees. But if you start your system design by like painting the happy little trees, you're going to have problems like building other things later. So when it comes to system design, like do a little bit of everything and then like start focusing in on the finer details, but don't focus on the detail immediately. So a good example of this, asking a system design question like design like an object-oriented vending machine, a lot of people immediately focus on like the button panel. It's like, okay, well, what about the whole box? Like, how are you actually storing the things in there? Is it a refrigerated unit? Like, are you going to have sodas in there? Like, how do you keep the sodas cold? Does it need power? If all you're focusing on is this little button thing, then you're not building the entire thing. You're just hyper-focused on one little detail. And so you kind of have to do like broad strokes of design a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit, and then gradually get into more and more detail on each of the things. For me as an interviewer, again, I like to know that you're keeping a lot of things in mind and that you're not just hyper focusing on one little piece, because the system is much bigger than that one little piece. Once you kind of like design out all the big chunks, then you say, okay, well, now that I've got kind of all that stuff planned out, is there any particular part you want me to dive in on? This is the part I want to dive in on, but are there, is there more detail anywhere around here that you want to jump into? So. Nick T says, yeah, I'm just going to put a little cloud over here. Yeah, exactly. But is it an AWS cloud or an Azure cloud? So yeah, I think if you design it in very sort of high level strokes and then eventually get into more and more detail, that can also be a really good way of designing out a technical challenge. Like, okay, I know I've got to loop over that menu, but I'm not going to like get really specific on how I'm going to loop over, a list of things. I'm just going to say I have to loop over like a dictionary and like process that data somehow. By writing out pseudocode in very vague, high-level terminology, it gives you the flexibility of implementing it how you want later, but at least gets the point across now of like, yeah, there's a sky and there's going to be a mountain here, but like I'm going to worry about the detail later on. Every time I hear Azure, I hear Dr. Evil saying it with frickin' lasers on their heads. Cool. All right, well, I think we'll wrap up there. Again, appreciate everybody hanging out. I think we'll, let's go raid Chris. Let's go see what Chris Perillo's up to. He's always fun to kind of hang out with. He's sometimes doing charades or something like that. And he loves people that cheer and do stuff in chat to make him eat these pumpkin pie flavored jelly beans that he's got that he absolutely detests. So yeah, anyway, we'll go raid Chris, and thanks for hanging out, everybody. Definitely come back on Sunday. So Sunday is going to be a panel of sort of tech adjacent roles and kind of the history of how a bunch of people got into those roles and how they studied software development and didn't end up in a development role. And we'll talk to them a little bit about some of that stuff. So we'll see you on Sunday at the same time. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and we're going to raid Chris in a couple of seconds. And we'll see you over there. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks again for hanging out. We'll catch you next time.